Hello, 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 everyone. Happy Thursday. Welcome back to a new thing with me, Pastor George. Excited to be here. Was away for a little while. I'm going to share a little bit of our travels that we went on because it relates to our topic, which I actually just thought of. It's not like I was at this place that I went and thinking of what I was going to do, but it actually, I think, is pretty important and coincides with July 4th and all other sorts of things. So, yeah, let's talk about it. So, uh, let's look at our Bible verses first, and then we'll just go through our topic. So, this is our Bible verse. We have two. We have 1 Corinthians 18 and 23. And obviously, you'll see that I have the New Testament Greek up there on the side, so you can look at that too. I'm going to bring that up only for one reason, because I think that Paul uses a word that in English helps us kind of understand a little bit of what we're going to be talking about today. But this is all from the first chapter of Corinthians, and so this is what Paul says in verse 18. He says, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God." And then later in verse 23, he says, "But we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles." So I think that this is really important because in this, we are going to talk about who we're going to talk about today and how this I think reveals what he's doing, but also what's going on today, especially when it comes to the person of Jesus and who he is and things like that. So here's a lovely picture of my wife. I'm sure she'll love me showing that. This is us at Monticello. My friend was off to the left of me, so I wasn't able to get a centered shot, and I'm like holding my camera at a weird angle. I didn't really intend for this to be like a picture I would show people, because she actually just stepped into frame. Originally, it was just supposed to be the house, but she always has to be the center of attention. So anyway, we took this photo. So we were at Monticello. For those of you who don't know, Monticello is the home of Thomas Jefferson, which you can visit in Virginia. It's pretty cool, and definitely worth checking out if you ever happen to be there. That and Mount Vernon. We didn't go to Mount Vernon. That's where George Washington lived, but I would definitely recommend doing that too. And so we went here to Monticello because I've always wanted to go. We were in Virginia, and it was on our day driving back to New Jersey, and so we're like, why not? It's not that far out of our way, so let's just go and see it. And so I'm really glad we did. I think it's definitely worth going to. But Thomas Jefferson's a really interesting guy. So you learn all sorts of stuff about him when you go through his house. You see all sorts of weird artifacts, lots of cool stuff that he invented, the tensions that kind of existed in a house of a guy who could say all men are created equal, but also had slaves, right? The one of the favorite things that the tour guide kept saying to us was, "We're dealing with a lot of complicated legacies here today, aren't we?" Like that sort of thing. She said that like 5 or 6 times, I think. It must be in the script, I imagine, because they have to. I'm sure it's tough to acknowledge and hold balance and things like that. But in any case, you go to the gift store, and when you're in the gift store, you can buy this. This is called The Life and Morals of Jesus in Nazareth. And it's sometimes also called the Jefferson Bible. And the reason it's called that is because Thomas Jefferson, while he was, I think this was happening after he was president. I'm not sure. But basically what he did is he took, as I'll show you, took the New Testament and cut it up into things that he believed actually happened, and made his own story of Jesus's life. And you can buy this. I actually did buy a copy of it, but I bought it on Amazon, and it hasn't arrived yet because the place there is expensive, right? As every tourist shop is, every gift shop is, right? It's expensive. So I went, I don't need to spend $50 on this. I can get the same thing on Amazon for cheaper. I know I'm part of the problem. So anyway. I bought this, so I'm going to keep it in my office with all my other religious texts over there. But I found it really interesting. I've heard about this before, but I've never actually looked at it, right? I knew that Jefferson had made a Bible and had basically created his own gospel. And this isn't necessarily new. A lot of times in Christian history, we'll see people make what we call harmonizations. And what that is it takes all the different narratives of the four Gospels and puts them together into into one narrative, right? Because sometimes they're recorded as happening in different times. Sometimes they are slightly different in terms of like what they focus on, and so harmonizations will take all of them and put them together. Generally, people are against that practice because it doesn't treat the texts as they were originally written, right? So you never see that preached. Usually, I've never seen it preached in church or anything like that, but sometimes scholars or theologians or other people will do that. And so here, right, Thomas Jefferson did this, and he was meticulous with everything he did. But you can still read it. This is actually his handwriting, which is really cool. And so this is what it says. It says, a table of the texts from the evangelists employed in this narrating and of the order of their arrangement. So you can see here, like, L is Luke, like MT is Matthew, J is John, MK is Mark, and basically he put all of these things together. And exactly what they're talking about. So he has Sermon on the Mount, and things like that in here. And this is really interesting. I'm going to show you what it actually looks like so you can see this. But basically what Jefferson did is he took the parts of the Bible or the story of Jesus that he thought actually happened rationally. You know, this is going to be a big thing, as we're going to talk about. And then says that this is what actually happened, and then excised everything that he thought was made up or added later. So again, these are the texts. And then this is his very nice handwriting as he introduces it. So the technical term, like most people call this the Jefferson Bible, but he never called it that. He called it the Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth, extracted textually from the Gospels in Greek, Latin, French, and English. And so you'll see that right here. He has some maps in Latin. Gotta love that. All right, and so we have here, right, so this is what a page of this thing looks like. So on the left, you see the Greek text as it was at the time. This is pretty similar to the one we have now, though our Greek texts have gotten a lot better because we've gotten a lot more access to manuscripts, so we're able to kind of know maybe stuff that was inserted or stuff like that. And then you have the Latin over there, which I'm sure is from the Vulgate. And then, of course, you have the French, which I can't speak, so I can't tell you about that. And then we have which I would believe is probably the King James Bible there. So he has all of the things here, and you can actually see that he has cut. Like, you can see the actual marks that you would use to cut paper and then paste it together, right? You can see that sometimes it's uneven, things like this. This is like a personal project for him. This is not something that he intended, I think, to sell or people to necessarily see. I'm not a Jefferson scholar, so if someone else says otherwise and they have actual credentials, listen to them. But I don't think that this is necessarily something that he intended to sell, because this is very much a personal work and things like that. But I actually want to take a look at the text, just so you can see what's different. So the nice thing is he also labels where the person is from. So you see an L here, right? That's Luke. So he gets all of this from Luke. And you'll notice where it starts. It says, and it came to pass in those days that there went out for a decree from Caesar Augustus, all the world should be taxed. So what's missing? Like the Annunciation, the idea that Mary's a virgin, stuff like that, right? Because that seems to be preposterous to Jefferson, because he's very much a rationalist, materialist sort of person, right? So it just starts off with them going to Bethlehem already. So they go, it says, to be taxed with Mary, his espoused wife, being great with child. And so it was that while they were there, the days were accomplished that she should be delivered. And she brought forth her firstborn son and wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. Skip, right? So it skips all over the shepherds, and of course there's no wise men in Luke, but he doesn't put them in right to the circumcision, right, when Jesus is named. And then he talks about how then there's again a skip to when they perform, when they go into the temple, and he's left there and things like that. And so here again, you can actually see you can see he pulls in, and then like he'll do like now in the 15th year, da 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 da, being the high priest, and then he cuts in this this part right here. John did baptize in the wilderness, and then you see verse 4 again in the same John from Matthew, right? So he's cutting all this together, and then he gets to John. He actually he does use all of the Gospels. Mostly, what I think he uses is the synoptic Gospels. Those are the ones that we would call Matthew, Mark, and Luke, because they all kind of present the same narrative in the same structure. John is different. He kind of does his own thing. But he does include John in here. And so it's really interesting to go through and see like kind of where he cut and put things in. But this was basically his attempt to tell us what he believes most likely happened. And this is where I want to pull back just to hear one quick second. So Jefferson, from evidence, right, that we have, was not a Christian in the sense of Orthodox Christian. And what I mean by that is like someone who believes in the Trinity, someone who believes in the resurrection, someone who believes in the atonement. Like basically a Nicene Christian, Jefferson is not. He was a deist, but he definitely had high value or high belief in the power of the Bible and Jesus, right? If he didn't care about it at all, he wouldn't have this. And I think that that's pretty clear, and I think that's clear from the testimony that we're given. We're going to look at some of the things he wrote. Most of us are obviously familiar with the Declaration of Independence, but there's another important thing that Jefferson wrote that we're actually going to read today, or at least I'm going to read parts of it. We're not going to read the whole thing. But this is it's stuff that he made, right? But I actually wanted to focus a lot on 1 Corinthians 1:23, where Paul says, "We preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles." When we talk about that stumbling block here, right? The thing that the word in Greek is scandalon. And scandalon is where we get the word scandalous from, right? So if we say something is scandalous, we get the idea that it's this shocking and not at all common and not good thing to hear, right? And that's a great thing, I actually think, to apply to a lot of the biblical teachings and the life of Jesus when it comes to when they hit our culture, and our culture doesn't really know what to do with them, so it does what Jefferson does. And this is just to show that this is always happening, right? This isn't just happening today. I just think that it's interesting about what Jefferson is doing and comparing it with what I've seen going on. And we'll look at some of that too. But like this foolishness, right? It seems like foolishness. This story of Jesus and his miracles and all these other things. It seems like foolishness to Jefferson. Like he understands, and as we'll see, he likes the parables and the teachings of Jesus. But he finds all of the other stuff around it to seem like to be foolishness, so we can just ignore it, right? But that's not the case, right? As Christians, we don't get that option. We see that this is that Jesus is connected, and the reason that Jesus's teachings are important is because of who he is, and so that's an important thing to hit. So I want to talk about Jefferson's grave. So you can see it at Monticello. He's buried on the property, just kind of down the hill. And there's an obelisk there. And so this is what's written on it. It says, "Here was buried Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of American Independence, of the Statute of Virginia for Religious Freedom, and father of the University of Virginia." Now, as you may point out or may notice, is that he leaves off, being a president, which is really interesting. But I think this shows what Jefferson really cared about in his life. This is like what he thinks his biggest contributions were to the United States. And I don't know about UVA, but definitely definitely the other two, right? Like definitely these two are pretty important in the way that they've shaped a lot of our talking about all sorts of things in the United States. But this is something we're not usually very familiar with. Statute of Virginia for religious freedom, right? So this is a law that was made in the Virginia legislature in 1777. So not long after Jefferson wrote the Declaration of American Independence, and I think that that's an important thing to think about. And we're going to read parts of it. We're actually going to read, not the entirety, we're probably going to read certain down to here. Basically what I want to get at is the importance. So just something to note is this, this is all from Monticello, which has a great wealth of resources on their website about Jefferson. So definitely worth checking out if you're interested in him. But we have here, this is, they say, the original manuscript in Jefferson's hand no longer exists. I think we do actually have that of the Declaration of Independence, I believe. I'm not sure. But we do know that he had other things in there that were taken out. Anyway, he says, the original manuscript in Jefferson's hand no longer exists. The text of the act as drafted by Jefferson and approved by revisers, as well as the changes adopted by the General Assembly, is provided below, with the General Assembly deletions shown in italics and the Assembly's insertions shown within brackets. So the things that are deleted, I feel like it should be opposite. I feel like it should be the things that are added are in italics and the things that were deleted in parentheses. To me, that seems to make more sense, but whatever. So whatever's in italics, so the whole beginning here, was part of it. That's what Jefferson originally wrote, but they got rid of. This also happened with the Declaration, so it's interesting to see what's changed. But anyway, I'm going to read this, and I'm going to get to a certain point, and then I'll stop, because I'm doing this to make a certain point about who Jefferson is and what he came and did to the text of the Bible, and how that's a common thing that happened. So this is what happened. This is what he said. Well aware that the opinions and belief of men depend not on their own will, but follow involuntarily the evidence proposed to their minds, that, whereas Almighty God hath created the mind free, and manifested his supreme will, that free it shall remain by making it altogether insusceptible of restraint, that all attempts to influence it by temporal punishments or burdens is what that means, or by civil incapacitations tend only to beget habits of hypocrisy and meanness, and are a departure from the plan of the holy author of our religion, who being Lord both of body and mind, yet chose not to propagate it by coercions on either, as was in his almighty power to do, but to extend it by its influence on reason alone, that the impious presumption of legislators and rulers, civil as well as ecclesiastical, who being themselves but fallible and uninspired men, have assumed dominion over the faith of others, setting up their own opinions and modes of thinking as the only true and infallible, and as such endeavoring to impose them on others, hath established and maintained false religions over the greatest part of the world and through all time, that to compel a man to furnish contributions of money for the propagation of opinions which he disbelieves and abhors is sinful and tyrannical, that even forcing him to support this or that teacher of his own religious persuasion is depriving him of the comfortable liberty of giving his contributions to the particular pastor whose morals he would make his pattern, and whose powers he feels most persuasive to righteousness. And he goes on and on and on. You'll notice that, like, back in the day, they didn't use period. So, but the reason I wanted to focus on this is because we can see what Jefferson's focus was here, right? So he starts off, and I think this is actually really important, because he talks about things that we're probably expecting. God has created the mind free, and said that it shall remain free, right? That we shouldn't use punishments to force people to believe certain things, right? And that that the way that we think about things follows evidence proposed to our minds, right? That we reach conclusions based on evidence, and we involuntarily, this is kind of interesting, then choose what we're going to believe. Now, I think that this is very Jeffersonian, right? Very Enlightenment, very reason, rationalism. And I do think partially this is true, but it's also partially wrong. But I think this is interesting, right? Because he mentions the plan of the holy author of our religion, which is kind of interesting, right? Jefferson definitely considered himself a Christian in the sense that he was a follower of Jesus Christ. And I think that that's absolutely true. I think if you were to say he's not that, you would run into things like the Jefferson Bible and be kind of hard pressed to say that that isn't going on. Now, is he an Orthodox, like, Christian? Would I say we could expect to see Jefferson in heaven? No, right? Which is pretty scandalous. Talk about a scandalous thing to say in the United States. But when it comes to believing the important things, Jefferson didn't do that. But he definitely believed that he was a follower and definitely claimed Christianity as his religion, obvious, but just one of his own making, right? And so he talks about the holy author of our religion, who being Lord of both body and mind, chose not to propagate it by coercions on either, as was in his almighty power to do. And so I believe, right, now he could be talking about God, just, God as in the almighty God or whatever, but he could also be talking about Jesus here as the author of Christianity, right, who chose not to propagate it by coercions. In either case, right, the important thing here is the reason that our religion, this being Christianity, is here is something that this is cut out, right? But to extend by its influence on reason alone. So there's this idea that the faith that's found in the Jefferson Bible, the things that Jesus said, are reasonable, right? That they are rational. And that's what Jefferson likes a lot about him. So let's look at some of the things Jefferson had to say. So this is a famous one, January 2nd, 1802. This is his letter to the Baptist Association of Danbury. Stop me if you've heard part of this before. You're not here, but you would if you could, especially when I get to that last sentence. He says, believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith and worship, and that with the legitimate powers of government reach actions only and not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that the act of the whole American people, which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. He's talking about the First Amendment there, right? Thus, building a wall of separation between church and state. This right here. So this is such a famous phrase, right? This wall of separation between church and state. Something to note is that that's not actually in the amendment, right? This is Jefferson's interpretation of that amendment. And so this idea has been crucial to deciding religious freedom cases in the United States, right? Like the Supreme Court has cited this, even though, again, it's not actually in the law. It's just really interesting, right? And people, especially people who are big on making sure that separation remains there or even goes beyond, are really important. They view this as being an incredibly important letter. So you probably heard that one before. Let's look at this one. This is from his notes on the state of Virginia in the section about religion. So this is 1782, sometime in 1782. They're not sure when. But it says, reason and free inquiry are the only effectual agents against error. So rationalism and being able to think and talk about anything. Reason and persuasion are the only practical instruments. To make way for these, free inquiry must be indulged. And how can we wish others to indulge it while we refuse it ourselves? So he's really big on rationalism. He's a man of his time. This is the Enlightenment. This is the stuff that's in the air. This is like what's driving everyone to think about these things. Lots of the founding fathers are influenced by this type of stuff, right? And so here, right, he's basing all of his belief around Jesus on rationalism and free inquiry. And so that's important. And then we have this. And I believe that this is, when he says this syllabus, is what he's talking about when he has his Jefferson Bible, right? So he's writing to a friend, or maybe not a friend. I don't know who William Short is. Let's find out. William Short, this is just all the things that he wrote him. All right, well, I don't know who he is, but let's just assume a friend or a exchanger of letters, right? So this he wrote in 1820. This is getting closer to his death, right? And so he's talking about this syllabus, and I believe he's referencing the Jefferson Bible, but it could not be. Could be other things. But I just think this is important, because this is what Jefferson thinks about Jesus, and that's important. So he says, but while this syllabus is meant to place the character of Jesus in its true and high light, so notice he has high praise of Jesus, as no impostor himself, but a great reformer of the Hebrew code of religion, it is not to be understood that I am with him in all of his doctrines. I am a materialist. He takes the side of spiritualism. He preaches the efficacy of repentance towards forgiveness of sin. I require a counterpoise of good works to redeem, etc., etc. So there's other things. It is the innocence of his character, the purity and sublimity of his moral precepts, the eloquence of his inculcations, the beauty of the apologues in which he conveys them that I so much admire. The apologues here are the stories. So what is Jefferson like about Jesus? Because he says, I disagree with him, right? Jesus is very focused on the spiritual stuff. I don't believe in any of that stuff, right? He actually seems to say, you need to do good works. He thinks that Jesus doesn't teach that. This is really interesting from an outside perspective, looking at the text. But it's how Jesus carries himself, the way he says things, his morals, his moral teachings, and the beauty of how he talks about them. So his parables and stuff like that Jefferson likes so much. And I actually think that this is true when it comes to how our culture views Jesus today, like even non-believers, right? Rarely you run into people that have negative opinions of Jesus. Lots of people have negative opinions of the church. Lots of people have negative opinions of religion. But very few people have negative opinion of Jesus. And I actually think that might be the one saving work and grace of the Spirit in our culture that is often, as we as Christians mess up, Jesus is still presented to people as a positive person. And I think that's good, because that allows us to then check ourselves when we go wrong, but also hold the culture to, like, well, do you even know what Jesus teaches? Do you know anything about him? Stuff like that, right? But here, Jefferson has a high opinion of Jesus. So, which you can see, right, in that he made this whole book to basically give himself his own daily devotional, I'd imagine, serving some sort of that sort of purpose for people, and for himself and for others, I would guess. So anyway, so what does this have to do with today? Well, people are still doing this today, and I actually have a very good example of this. So this is something that happened at my seminary. So this isn't happening outside in the culture. This actually happened at a seminary in the United States at Princeton, right? So this is a workshop called Holy Blacked Out, right? And it was a workshop that happened while I was there. Well, this wasn't when I was there, but this happened while I was there as well, and it's happened a few times since, maybe, I guess. But basically, it says, this workshop will explore creative exegetical methods of reading toxic theologies in the pursuit of healing and liberation. The participants will discover and practice erasure poetry and blackout poetry as a medium of this work. So what does this mean? Well, this is what it looks like, right? So they take books or they take sections of the Bible and they black them out in order to, do some art, but also to communicate certain things about the text. So I'm going to try and find some good ones here, but you can see, like, they mostly take scriptures against all sorts of different things, but they have done it, I remember, with the Bible. Oh man, this is a problem when you don't have an Instagram. Just classic me not having an Instagram. Yeah, they keep getting me. All right, I didn't expect this to happen, so I apologize about that. But one of the things that is important to note is that this type of stuff that they're talking about is still going on today, right? Let me see if I can find out. Holy Blackout, let's see if I can. Oh man, I probably should have worried about it. You always have to worry about all of these Revelation people talking about how the world is going to die or whatever, right? Maybe this is a good example of it. I don't know. Yeah, so here we go, right? So this is a passage from Ephesians, So you can see here that it's been changed to be more affirming of LGBT things, right? So wives, love your wives, holy splendor, their bodies tenderly joined a great mystery, right? And so obviously this is a much more artistic thing, but this is also artistic. Like Jefferson's making choices here, presenting a narrative, things like that. I think that this is important because what we're doing when we do something like is this is just arc. Like we could look at this. Some people might look at this and they think that, wow, Jefferson, how could you do this to the text? Um, like you know, uh, or they might go the opposite way. They might say, oh, this is ridiculous. I can't believe people do that, but this is fine, right? But actually, what both Jefferson and what people who do this today are doing is they're taking the words of the Bible and they're pulling from them what they want and weaving context and weaving points and weaving everything else behind in order to affirm their own lifestyle. And I honestly think that that's my contention with Jefferson here, when he says, like, I think that they remove this part. But if he believes this, right, that it's just involuntary evidence proposed to our minds, I actually don't believe that that's true. I believe we do carry and we actually can selectively choose what evidence we want to look at, because sometimes if we run into things that we find scandalous, we may ignore them. And you see this happen all the time with teachings in the Bible, right? All the time. Here's the rub, right? I'm not here to attack Jefferson or to attack these people, even though I think that this, while maybe being an interesting exercise, is not good, right? This basically what these things are, but these people are doing is they're putting into practice what a lot of us do. Sorry, there's a fly. A lot of us do in our normal lives, in the way that if we don't pay attention to what God is saying or what He is calling us to believe, we're just doing this, but mentally. We're just not making a book out of it or actually blacking out parts of the Bible that we disagree with, right? And so I don't do this to attack Jefferson or the other people, outside of saying that I just think like you should be very aware of why you're doing these things, and realize that maybe you shouldn't be correcting Scripture. Scripture should be correcting you. But for us, it is scandalous, right? In Jefferson's time, to suggest that rationality could be faulty is a scandalous thing to say, especially because it's in vogue, right? That's what everyone at the time is talking about, all the intellectuals, right? So it'd be weird if you were like, no, actually, rationality can't be trusted. There were people like that, but generally they were laughed at and not listened to and paid attention to. That maybe the human mind can see evidence that it only wants to see. Really important to think about. But we have to remember that there are things that Jesus says that are scandalous to us, things that Paul teaches that are scandalous to us, but just because they're scandalous or difficult for us doesn't give us the right to avoid them. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. That's what my trip to Monticello taught me. There was a lot of other interesting things in there, but I just wanted you guys to hear that because it was 4th of July recently, and Jefferson died on the 4th of July. But just it's in the air. It's in the air, and we all do it. And so the goal is to not. So work on not doing that. And I will see you guys on Sunday for worship. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Peace out.